Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dean Meadows for another episode of Dean's Dialogue. Hope you're having a great Tuesday afternoon. Once again, we are going to continue our series on the reliability of the New Testament. I'm so glad that you guys are with us. I have thoroughly enjoyed the process of researching, not just for this episode, but also mapping out and laying the groundwork for episodes in the future. In the last episode, we wrapped up our initial look at the Gospels by examining the dating of John's Gospel. And here are a couple of things that we've noted so far in general about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Number one, there's good historical evidence stating that these are the authors of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and that these documents were written early within the lifetime of the close associates of the apostles, or by the apostles themselves who saw and experienced the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. And that this evidence is supported both internally as we look into the document, but also externally looking outside the document as well. But we run into another question, and for some people, it's a really big problem. I can't tell you how many people have come up to me, young people at camp, or people who have emailed me, people who have private messaged me on Facebook, and they've asked this question. What about the originals? Do we have access to the originals? Are the originals in like some museum or something like that? And here's the answer to that question is that we don't. The originals, the absolute first copies of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are no longer in existence. And so this also raises another question is if we don't have copies of the originals, if we don't have the actual original documents in place, how do we know that the narrative of the originals wasn't corrupted over time as it was passed down from one person to another person, to another person, to another person, from the time that they were written all the way up until now? And so what most people seem to ask, and they ask it in this way, how do we know that the original documents in their transmission didn't undergo what they call the telephone problem? And most of us have played telephone before. It's where you have a chain of people, and the original message starts at one end, and they pass that message down and all the way to the last person in the chain. And usually what takes place is the last person in the chain completely fumbles the message. How do we know that that didn't happen with the copying of these original documents? And so that's what we're going to get into today. And so one of the things that we have to look at first is, all right, how many manuscripts do we have? And this is where most of the textual transmission of the New Testament is going to play a vital role in trying to determine if this telephone scenario actually took place. Because the more manuscripts that we have of any ancient document, not just the Bible, the better. And why is that better? It's better because this allows us to cross-reference for accuracy and identify those small changes that have taken place through transmission, but also those those big changes that could have taken place as well. And this is all a part of textual criticism. So, do we have a large trove of New Testament manuscripts from different time periods that we can use to cross-reference for accuracy to get us back to the original? And the answer to that question is an astounding yes. We have a large number of manuscripts that we can use to cross-reference for accuracy of the New Testament and identify those small and big changes that may or may not have taken place. Currently, there are 5,856 Greek manuscripts, which are in the original language of Koine Greek. We have 10,000 plus manuscripts that are in Latin, 2,000 in Armenian, 975 in Coptic, 600 in Ethiopian, 350 in Syriac. Those are just some examples that I'm giving. In total, we have 23,986 copies of the New Testament. And so if we took just the Greek manuscripts and we stacked them, they would stretch out for more than a mile long. Now, in comparison, the average ancient work that we have, as far as copies go, would only stack to about 4 feet high. There are other things that we need to note also, as far as, well, what's the second best, most attested work in antiquity? The New Testament is clearly the first. It's the most attested work in antiquity. The second most attested work in antiquity is Homer's Iliad at 1,757. And then Suetonius' work comes in third with around 200 copies. So we see, just as far as sheer volume of copies, the New Testament, far outweighs anything else in antiquity. Also, we have completed New Testaments and fragments that date very early. Not only do we have a large amount of manuscripts, we have early completed New Testaments and even earlier fragments. So, for example, the Codex Sinaiticus, which is 300 years removed from its original, is the closest of any ancient document. Homer's Iliad is 500 years removed from its original. Suetonius is 800 years removed from its original. We also have fragments like P52, which date from around 125 to 130. P46, P67, and P66, they all date from around 170 to 220 AD. And so the question is, what does all of this mean? It means that the New Testament is the most widely attested work in antiquity by any comparison. It also gives us a trove of manuscripts that scholars can look at and see just how much has changed over time with regards to the transmission and the copying of the New Testament. So this is a great way to test for accuracy, of the New Testament. How much really has changed from the time that these things were originally written to the oldest copies that we have now. And so this is what we find, that when scholars look at the wide variety of evidence with regards to the New Testament manuscripts, we find that the New Testament, in its transmission of the text, is 99.5% accurate. And so what does that mean? It also means that it doesn't fall victim to what I call the telephone fallacy. That as the message was transmitted over the ages, it got lost in translation, and that there were these big problems in the text. Now, we're going to talk more about that in the next episode with regards to why isn't it 100%. But right now, I'd like to transition to this analogy that's often made to the game of telephone. So this is one of the more common objections that Christians hear about the viability of the New Testament's accuracy. And so one thing that you'll often hear, as I've already stated, is that, hey, you get one copy of a copy of a copy. How can you trust these documents? Or, hey, what makes you think that what's been written down now is an accurate depiction of what's taking place 2,000 years ago? After all, couldn't it be that, it underwent this thing similar to the game of telephone? Now, here are some things that you need to know about why that's not a proper analogy to New Testament copying and transmission. First, the goal of telephone or the telephone game is completely different than the transmission of the New Testament. The telephone game is designed. It is designed to mess the message up. It is designed to see how badly someone can butcher the initial statements. However, with the goal of New Testament scribes, for the most part, their goal was to accurately document what was passed down to them. That's the first problem with the analogy. Secondly, in the game of telephone, you only get one chance to hear, remember, and pass down what the person before you stated. In the transmission of the New Testament, scribes were not limited to how many times they could check and cross-reference back to the manuscript they had in their possession. And this is key because in telephone, because you can't check back, that allows for multiple errors, whereas scholars have seen time and time again that there's virtually no difference in the manuscripts of the New Testament documents. Third, while playing the game telephone, you can't even check the statement of the person who is whispering in your ear or others that have spoken. The only message that you can focus on is the one of the person before you in the chain. Whereas in the copying down of the New Testament documents, scribes could often refer to multiple documents and cross-reference those documents with their work to make sure that the message was as accurate as possible. Fourth, many people who play telephone don't even care if they win or lose because they understand it's merely a game. The copyist of the New Testament documents had a deep sense of responsibility when it came to their task. Therefore, they were more likely to care about the message they were copying, whereas most people playing the game, telephone, don't care. I've never heard someone who's played telephone and at the end, the last person in the chain who completely butchers it says, "Oh man, everything is riding on me getting this right." Whereas most of the time for scribes, that's the exact mentality that they had. They had this deep sense of, man, I have to get this right because if I mess this up, I'm messing up the transmission of holy words that were handed down by close associates of the apostles or the apostles themselves. With these differences in mind, it becomes clear that telephone game is not analogous to the New Testament transmission and copying of those documents. It's simply a flawed analogy. And so it should be rejected by Christians as a viable argument against the reliability of the New Testament. But what we've also seen is that not only do we have a treasure trove of manuscripts that we can cross-reference, that in cross-referencing those, scholars have seen that the text has been accurately transmitted, 99.5% accuracy rate. So the next time that we get together, we're going to start looking at some of the arguments that a guy by the name of Bart Ehrman makes against the reliability of the New Testament. And he wrote this book called Misquoting Jesus back in 2005 that has really shifted a lot of people's view on Christianity. There are so many young people that I've talked to and that you have probably talked to that have come in contact, maybe not with the book directly, but with the arguments in the book. And so we're going to start unpacking Dr. Ehrman's arguments so that you can equip yourself to engage those arguments and be better prepared, but also to edify and fortify your faith as well. This is Dean Meadows with Dean's Dialogue. If you want more with regards to New Testament reliability, go over to www.thedailyapologist.com. You'll be sure to find some stuff there. Thank you so much for tuning in. It has been an honor and a pleasure. And remember, equip yourself to engage the culture. Dean Meadows signing off. God bless.